I've been saying for a few weeks now, we're going to be studying the book of Galatians this summer. I hope you're reading that ahead of time. Not a long book, 6 chapters, you'll get through it. And it takes a time or two to read that one. I'm looking forward to the study, so be prepared for Galatians this summer. 2 more weeks, though, in May, and we felt like it was the right, even though we finished chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians, felt like it was the right thing to do to just kind of keep hanging out here and talking about love. It's that important, it's that necessary. So today and next week, Pastor Damon will conclude the whole series on love. So a little bit of a change this morning. You have a text inside you have a text at the top of the outline. You have that text on the side of the bulletin. That's not the text we're going to look at today. But the text that we are going to look at is on the screen. And of course, if you bring a Bible, if you remember those things, or your app, you can have it open to Mark chapter 12 this morning. And we will be looking at that passage here in just a little bit. So with the conclusion or the concluding 2 weeks of this series on love, trying to take it out of just one realm of romance, but not completely. I mean, agape love still has something to do with relationships in romance, witnessed by, frankly, I guess it's a Dear John letter that one man received. Dear Jimmy, no words could ever express the great unhappiness I've felt since breaking off our engagement. Please say you'll take me back. No one could take your place in my heart. Please forgive me. I love you. I love you. I love you. Yours forever, Anne. P.S. Congratulations on winning the lottery. I guess you could say few words are spoken more carelessly and mindlessly than I love you. But conversely, no 3 words hold greater potential in moving us and inspiring us and encouraging us than I love you. It's not just the words then, right? It's the life behind the words. So, as I mentioned last week, we looked at Paul's concluding remarks, the last sentence of what's commonly called the love chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And he made the bold but accurate and true statement that among faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these is love. Now, I don't know about you. If you're like me, you wake up almost every morning with the best intentions of improving yourself, of trying to be the image of God to others, just being a better person, however you think about it in those terms. But I wake up and maybe I've heard or prepared or preached a sermon on being a servant, and I'm convicted by it, and I wake up the next morning. It's like I've got to practice. I got to think about this. It's not just I literally have to think about it through the day. Servant, or maybe it doesn't matter. Humility, joy, whatever it might be. And it's like there's this list this long of things that I should really be working on. And it can be a little bit frustrating because it's such a long list. How do you do it? Paul helps us. Not just in 1 Corinthians 13, but actually in the book we're going to study this summer in Galatians. In Galatians 5, as many of you know, there's a passage in there that he calls the fruit of the Spirit. The interesting thing is, as we'll see, it's a singular noun. It's a fruit of the Spirit. It has many facets, but the fruit of the Spirit is love. It's like Paul is saying, Todd, let me help you. When you wake up in the morning and you want to be a better person, you want to be more like Christ, you want to be the image bearer that he's called you to be, love. Just love. Now, he helps. It kind of looks like this. There's joy in it, and there's peace and patience and kindness and so forth. But it's love. And that's basically what Paul does at the end of 1 Corinthians 13, writing to a church that's divided, arguing. It must have been a mess of a congregation. And he gets to this point where he says, I've talked to your heads long enough. I need to speak to your heart. And you need to learn how to love. And among faith and hope and love, the greatest is love. Now, Paul wasn't the only one to make such a provocative statement when it comes to ranking spiritual matters. Maybe you've already thought of this in the weeks prior, but our text this morning talks about a time when, in the week that Jesus is in Jerusalem, just prior to his crucifixion, he still loves us enough and cares and is concerned enough and compassionate enough to keep teaching us all the way to the end. And on one of those occasions, some Jewish leaders are coming up to him in the temple area and they're trying to trick him with questions. One of those Jewish leaders was a Sadducee. That particular sect of the Jews did not even believe in the resurrection, but they're trying to trick Jesus with a question about marriage and the resurrection. You can read about it in Mark 12. We're not going to take that time this morning to discuss that one, but after he answers that question sufficiently, another Jewish leader, this time a Pharisee, has a question. And this time it seems not so much a question to trick Jesus, but a question out of the heart about whether or not this man is kind of on the right path. When he wakes up every morning, what does he have to work on? And the law is huge. It's not just a list of fruits of the Spirit. It's not just a list of a few attributes. It's Exodus, it's Leviticus, it's Deuteronomy. And he asked Jesus a question. What's the most important commandment? Like, seriously? In 5 books of the Bible, what's number one? And as incredulous as the question is the fact that Jesus has an answer. And he can give an answer. And he does so in Mark 12, beginning with verse 29. Jesus answered, "The most important is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength." The second is this. It's like, I'll give you the top 2. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. We're talking about the 10 commandments. We're talking about how to build the tabernacle, how to worship God, how to make offerings to God, how to make sacrifices to God. Of all of that, Jesus can rank 1 and 2. The scribe said to him, "You're right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one and there is no other besides him, and to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." I don't know if he's speaking as a minority or if that's the majority view. I have a feeling that what Jesus is going to say next tells me that he's in the minority here. Because Jesus said, when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You're not far from the kingdom of God. You're getting it." And after that, no one dared ask him any questions. This is just verification of what Paul wrote. That's why Paul could say, of faith and of hope and of love, the greatest of these is love. Love for God, love for others. So what I'd like to do this morning is we're just going to preach half the sermon that you have in your outline, all right? And Damon's going to follow up next Sunday with the rest of it from another critical piece of New Testament writing on the subject of love. But very quickly this morning, we're just going to look at what are some implications of the fact that we are actually commanded to love, and that it's the greatest commandment for us to fulfill. It's on the one hand, it's meant to be encouraging this morning. On the other hand, it is so convicting. It is for me. Let's start with the basics. Number one, to be commanded to love means that love is a decision. And that seems pretty straightforward. We've said it already before in this series. Love is a decision. By virtue of the fact that we are commanded to love our neighbor, implies that this love, this agape, as we have called it, as the Greek call it, this agape is less an emotion, it's more of a decision. Yes, I know there's this thing called behavioral psychology where they tell you if you do something, eventually your emotions will catch up with you. There may be truth to that, I suppose. But emotions or not, we're commanded to love. It's a decision, or it's an act of the will. And so I haven't done it to this point. I'm going to try my feeble attempt this morning to give us a definition of agape, or this kind of love that Jesus is talking about, that Paul spoke about in 1 Corinthians 13. I've defined it this way. It is willingly working for the well-being of others, even if it means sacrificing our own well-being in the process, and doing so with an attitude of care and compassion. We've referenced this story, I think, a couple weeks ago. A young man with much wealth approaches Jesus with a question of his own. What must I do to inherit eternal life? It's on his mind. I don't think it's a trick question. I think it's a sincere question. Jesus begins to answer, well, you know what the law says. Love God, honor your parents, so forth and so on. And the man said, well, I've done those things. What does Jesus say? There's one thing you lack. In the context of where we're going, I think what he's saying, the thing you lack is love for God. Because his answer is really basically an application of that command. If you would love God, if you love God, you will sell all the stuff that's getting in the way of your relationship with God. And what happened? The man went away sad because he had so much stuff that got in the way of his relationship with God. It was so prevalent in his life. He was so happy with all of his wealth. His stuff made him happy, not God. But yet, if I have this feeling that if 5 minutes later you walked up to the rich young ruler and asked him, do you love God? What do you think his answer would be? Well, of course I love God. What do you think Jesus' answer would be? No, you don't. Because if you loved God, you'd get rid of all the stuff that gets in the way of your relationship with God. We all know John 3:16, right? God so loved the world, gave his only son. 1 John 3:16, equally important passage. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. It's critical because despite appearances, despite what you might think, and even as you read the gospel accounts, despite what it looks like, no one took Jesus' life from him. He laid it down. He willingly made the decision to go to the cross for us. He willingly laid it down. That's what John is saying. And now we're told to do the same. And I can't tell you exactly what that looks like. It's going to be different for all different situations and different times and different places. I can't say exactly what, maybe it means actually giving our lives. I can't always say exactly what it looks like to lay down our lives for others, but I would guarantee you that instinctively, every one of us this morning knows what it looks like when we withhold our love, don't we? We know when we've kept it. We know when we have withheld our resources or our riches, when we've kept our distance, when we've insisted on our own way. We know when we withhold love. Even if we don't know exactly the extent of what it means to lay down our lives for others, we know what it means to do the opposite. All the more reason why we have to accept the fact that love is a commandment means love is a decision. It's a decision you may be making right now. We've got to decide to love God, to love others around us. Second point that comes out of this commandment, love is modeled then after Christ. And this is the good news. It's both hard and good. See, then we're not left to just think for ourselves, well, what does this look like then? What's it look like for me to lay down my life? Preacher just said we don't always know what it looks like. Well, I don't know what it looks like. Well, there is part of an answer. It's modeled for us in Christ. Just a day or two after answering the question about the greatest commandment, again, Jesus is still in Jerusalem. It's before the crucifixion. He told his apostles that he was going to give them a new commandment, or he was giving them a new commandment. And it reads this way, John 13:34. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. And you're thinking, well, either Jesus is mistaken or the writer is mistaken. That doesn't sound so new. We just have been talking about it. Love one another. Yet Jesus calls it a new commandment. In what way is it new? And I would answer in the phrase, as I have loved you. When you have seen me love the unlovable, that's what you're called to do. When you've seen me touch the untouchable, that's what I'm calling you to do. You've seen me around people who want to kill me. You've seen me interact with my enemies. That's what I'm calling you to do. The good news is we don't have to come up with the answer. The bad news is, the hard news is, it's a really hard model to follow. But all throughout his ministry, he's just giving us these clues of what this looks like. On another occasion, he speaks of loving our neighbors. You remember what happened? He's asked, well, then who is my neighbor? Help me out. Jesus responds with the well-known parable of the Good Samaritan. A man who laid down his riches, his resources, despite racial and cultural barriers, comes to the aid of a person in need. Sounds and looks a lot like Jesus. Give me another clue. Well, right before saying a new commandment I give to you, Jesus washed their feet, the apostles' feet, with these words, I've given you an example that you should also do just as I have done to you. Model. So yes, on the one hand, it's good news that we don't have to come up with our own answers. The hard news is we've got plenty to work from in the life of Jesus. It's a command because we have a model to follow. And then thirdly, another implication of this command, I believe, is Jesus is telling us that love is to be our distinguishing feature. Love is to be our distinguishing feature. So immediately after the new commandment, you know the next word, the next sentence. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you love for one another. Now, you and I, individually and as a collective body, as a church, are fighting against some, at times deserved, at many times undeserved, perceptions of who we are. Would you agree with that? People think they know what a Christian is. They don't. But their perception is their reality. It's a difficult place to be in as a believer. Our reputation can be soiled by factors that have nothing to do with us, but affect us all the same. Just this week, I was reading an article by Colin Hansen. He's the editor-in-chief of the Gospel Coalition. He wrote about a time that he was asked to speak at a college Christian group on the campus of Cornell University, an Ivy League school in upstate New York. And they wanted him to speak about the history of the religious right in politics. He said, I assume they're not getting a lot of that in an Ivy League school. So he accepted the invitation to go speak to this Christian campus group at Cornell. And in the course of it, he just simply asked, what do your classmates associate with Christianity? And the answer that came back to him shocked him. And when he wrote it and I read it, it shocked me. Here are these, we're calling them educated college students in an Ivy League school who, when they associate something with Christianity, their answer was Westboro Baptist Church. That was their association with Christianity. One of the nation's prestigious universities talking about the world's largest religion, and they think of an overgrown family cult in Topeka. So what do we do with that? How do we respond? How can we say, no, love is the distinguishing feature of the church and of the Christian? And so here's the challenge, and this is the difficulty. Hansen offered this. In this media climate, no rational defense of Christianity will change many minds. When people are so irrational and so often left field, unfair, you can't debate out of that. You can't make them think logically or reasonably. His suggestion, which I think is a wise one and one that reflects Jesus' words, he challenges the church to think small and to think personal. By this, what is this? Love. All people will know you're my disciples. And so, rather than trying to solve this with an ad campaign or any other campaign, when Christians teach ESL classes to Spanish speakers like this church does, when Christians serve as foster parents and children's advocates and adopt children without a stable home, as people in this church have done, when Christians in Gardner, Kansas support and sponsor children in Ethiopia so they can just attend school, so they can have clothes to attend school, to hopefully get a degree, to hopefully better their lives so they can support their families. That's the distinguishing feature that we're going to be known for. Because across history and around the world, Christians have always done and brought extraordinary change through very ordinary means. They don't always get headlines, rarely do. But it doesn't mean they don't have effect. Let me give you an example on a very big global scale right now. all that's going on in and around Israel. My friend Bob Mendelson, who works with Jews for Jesus, shared this message on his Facebook post. It was written by the Board of National Pastors and Elders in that region. They wrote, "In light of the current situation in which it is expressed in polarization and hatred between Arab and Jewish citizens, we Israeli Jews and Arabs who share the same faith in Jesus as Messiah and Lord declare that we are united in brotherly love that is rooted in our faith and based on the scriptures of the Old and the New Testament." And then they quote John 13, 34, and 35. So right now, there are Palestinian Christians and Jewish Christians on their knees praying for peace. And it could seem insignificant. It's certainly invisible. But that's their response. They love their people so much to pray for them, to pray for peace, to pray for unity, to pray for Jesus to be known in the midst of the conflict. And so then, after these words and more and a prayer, Jesus is taken to the cross. And he lays down his life, the ultimate act of love. And because it's the ultimate act, and because it's the most important act of love, he gave us the reminder that we celebrate in communion. To rejoice as we remember and as we rehearse the gospel of a body given for us, of blood spilled for us, a picture to be imitated and lived. Well, let me close this morning just as practically as I can. One of those life situations where the question, what would Jesus do, is a good question. And the response is a good response. I don't know how many of you know who Stu Weber is. Maybe you read a book or two of his. Longtime pastor in Oregon, over 30 years, and former Vietnam veteran who had a real heart for raising up strong men of leadership. So in all of his years in the military, as he said, did not exactly help him with controlling his temper and having personal relationship skills, as he put it. Early in his ministry, he said, I just literally had to stop playing church league basketball because my temper would get in the way. He said in an interview in Leadership Journal, a decade had passed, and he said, I'd really not had a flare-up of my temper. And he said, I recalled how I thanked God that I was victorious over this problem in my life and had grown in spiritual development. And then he said, my oldest son made the varsity basketball team. In short, he said, I terrorized the refs. On one particular occasion, he wrote about and confessed, I started the game on the second row and was on the floor level with no recollection of how I got there. That's when the nasty letters from his church members came. He said they were right. Every one of them were right. But there was one letter that he saved. And all it said was, Stu, I know your heart. I know that's not you. And I know that you want to live for Christ and his reputation, and I know that's not happened at these games. If it would be helpful to you, I'd come to the games with you and sit beside you. That's what Jesus would do. Wouldn't write a nasty letter. He'd say, I'm here. I'm going to think the best of you, protect you, trust in you. Weber concluded, that man saved my life and my ministry. It was an invitation, a gracious extension of truth. He assumed the best and believed the best in me. That's what it looks like. That's what we're talking about. That's the love that God has shown us in the person of Jesus.